I'm Sarah Sykes, 32, the daughter my family never stopped calling the quiet one. At home, brilliance was measured in noise, Mark the visionary, Chloe the inspiration while I was nothing more than the background, praised only for keeping papers in order. That illusion cracked the night Chloe turned her camera on me, laughing to thousands. Guys, meet the human filing cabinet. My humiliation became her content, and the world watched me shrink. Ever been laughed at by the very people meant to protect you? Hit like if someone ever mocked you for being less, and comment if you know what it feels like to be erased in your own family. For me, it all began with a birthday at the Lakehouse, a stage where I was never meant to shine. The line etched itself into my head as soon as I stepped into the Lakehouse that afternoon, the July sun spilling over the manicured lawn, glinting against champagne glasses, gilded decorations, and the expensive smiles of people who pretended to know us. A cascade of laughter rolled across the veranda, polished and hollow, like something rehearsed for an audience. I could feel the weight of eyes sliding past me, searching for the real stars of the evening. They weren't looking at me. They never were. They will regret the laughter one day. The thought flickered in the back of my mind, faint and quick, almost drowned by the orchestral strings echoing from the speakers. Still, it pulsed there, stubborn and alive. Mother stood at the center of the dining hall like a conductor, every gesture sharp and precise, her sequin gown catching light the way she intended every lens to catch her pride. She spoke of family, of legacy, of success. Then her voice tilted upward, swelling into her favorite performance, the praise of her perfect children. Mark, she said, eyes shining as if the man could cure disease with his business plans, has proven himself to be a true visionary, a leader who sees beyond the horizon. We are so proud. The applause came quickly, obedient, the way one applauds a speech you've already heard but must pretend is new. Mark, smug as ever, lifted his glass with a half-smile that didn't bother hiding his arrogance. And Chloe, Mother continued, turning to my sister, who was holding her phone at just the right angle, has captivated millions. An inspiration to young women everywhere. Chloe twirled her hair with the precision of a showgirl, her followers' comments flashing across her screen as she live-streamed her own presence at the family table. Every gesture was an act of self-consumption. Every look was a camera shot. I sat, invisible, the cool stem of my glass slick against my palm. Father glanced at me briefly, almost apologetically. He would never interfere. He never had. And of course, Mother's voice lifted with mock warmth as her eyes found me. Our little paper pusher, the one who keeps things tidy. A laugh, carefully disguised as affection, rippled from her lips. We'd be lost without our human filing cabinet. The laughter started with her. Then Mark added a chuckle. Chloe let out a squeal into her phone, and within seconds the whole table had joined. Glasses clinked, throats opened, shoulders shook. Guys, meet my sister, the human filing cabinet. Chloe announced into her camera, her voice pitched high for the audience that didn't care about me but delighted in cruelty. The lens zoomed in on my face, and I knew, in that instant, thousands of strangers were watching me shrink. I forced my lips into a smile, tight enough to hold back the heat behind my eyes. My throat burned with every laugh, but I swallowed it. The air was sweet with perfume and wine, yet bitter with my own silence. Around the table, their joy swelled like a tide, drowning me in the role I hadn't chosen but had always been forced to play. The table blurred for a moment as if the chandelier's light was too bright, as if the clinking silverware and chatter pressed against my skull. My body remained perfectly still, my face placid, but inside, the words carved themselves into stone. I was scenery. I was the background of their stage. And every actor around me played their part so convincingly they forgot I might still be alive. My glass trembled slightly, but I steadied it against the table, hiding the small rebellion from their eyes. Linda beamed, proud of her own wit. David lowered his gaze to his plate. Mark leaned back in his chair, basking in adoration, while Chloe tilted her camera to catch the shadows across my face, ensuring my humiliation became content. The laughter swelled again, solidifying the truth. I was the ghost in the family play. I leaned toward my plate, lips barely parting, my voice a secret meant only for me. If only they knew who they were laughing at. In my family, brilliance was measured in noise, and failure was ignored if dressed well. The memory carries me back, not to the Lakehouse stage of 2023, but to years earlier, those endless dinners where the chandeliers burned too brightly, and the applause for hollow dreams filled the air thicker than the scent of roasted lamb. If I close my eyes, I can still hear the rhythms of their adoration. The thud of Mark's fist on the table as he declared a new idea, the squeal of Chloe's delight when her vanity found new ground to occupy, the carefully choreographed nods of my mother, the soft avoidance of my father's gaze. I was there, but never part of the chorus. They talked about investments as if money were nothing more than water from a spring that would never run dry. Each time Mark threw out another half-formed plan, the family cheered as if they had discovered fire itself. "A blockchain cafe," he announced once in 2019, his voice booming through the restaurant where we had gathered. He waved his hands with the confidence of a prophet, painting a future where caffeine met crypto, where every cup of coffee contained a miracle of digital currency. My father leaned back, eyebrows arched in that particular mixture of skepticism and surrender, while my mother clapped her hands as if Mark had already reinvented the economy. 75,000, she said, turning to my father with a flick of her fingers. He needs seed money immediately. Within days, Mark had the check in his hands. The project collapsed before the year ended, swallowed by his lack of focus, but no one spoke of failure. They spoke instead of vision. And then there was Chloe. Always Chloe. She lounged at the table in sequins and soft lighting, her lips red, and her smile sharper than any blade. "What I need," she announced in 2021, "is a content house. Imagine every wall a backdrop, every corner a studio. My brand could triple in 6 months." She pouted just enough to look like she might break if denied. My father cleared his throat, but my mother swooped in to soothe the air. "Of course, darling," she said, "it's the future. We'll co-sign the lease." The ink dried on the papers before the month ended, and Chloe's vanity project, though little more than an echo chamber for self-indulgence, became another golden shrine erected at the altar of parental devotion. Failures were rebranded as stepping stones. Expenses became investments. Every hollow echo was reframed as brilliance, if it made enough noise. I remember sitting there, listening, my fork idle against porcelain, my silence heavier than their laughter, because I too had once asked. Years earlier, in 2018, when I confessed the dream I carried with more reverence than any of Mark's whims or Chloe's glittering tantrums, flight school. The sky had always called to me, the vast expanse where noise meant nothing and discipline meant everything. I had researched costs, schedules, the grueling hours of study. All I asked for was a chance. "It's too expensive," Mother said, dismissing me with a wave of her manicured hand. "Impractical. You'll never pay it off." Father lowered his eyes, as though he agreed but lacked the courage to speak it aloud. My brother smirked. My sister laughed. And the dream withered on the vine. Denied in the same moment, Mark's fantasies flourished, unchecked. The unfairness carved deep, and I wore that silence like armor. For years I told myself it didn't matter that I didn't need their help, that I could carve my path without their gilded approval. But every family dinner, every champagne toast to another hollow venture, reminded me of the hypocrisy. Mark's blockchain cafe collapsed. Chloe's content house bled money. Still they were celebrated. And me? I was the one who kept accounts, the one who made myself small so their noise could fill the room. Linda leaned across the table one evening, her voice honeyed but cutting, and announced to a room full of strangers, "Mark is a genius in the making. A true Sykes. Chloe will inspire millions. We're so proud." She didn't look at me when she spoke. She didn't need to. My absence was deliberate, rehearsed, perfected. I remember staring down at the glass of wine in my hand, the crimson liquid swirling as if it might hold some answer. But all it held was reflection, my face dim beneath the chandelier's brilliance. Quiet competence was invisible. Sacrifice was disposable. In that moment, I began to keep count. Not on paper, not aloud, but deep within me. Every slight, every denial, every dollar thrown into their noise became an entry in a ledger no one else could see. Each moment of humiliation tallied against them. My own silent audit of justice. By the time the plates were cleared and the waiters retreated into the shadows, I had already etched another line into my mental book. A debt owed, a balance waiting, a reckoning. Sarah silently records a mental ledger of injustice. Even at my proudest moment, 2 empty seats told me exactly what I was meant to them. Nothing. The sun that morning was merciless, beating down on the polished rows of white uniforms stretched across the Naval Academy parade ground. Brass buttons glinted like stars, Sabers caught flashes of light with every turn, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with the hum of pride, tradition, and legacy. I stood straighter than I ever had before, my cap perfectly aligned, my chin tilted at just the right angle. This was supposed to be the culmination of years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, of pushing past the point where others quit. It was supposed to be the day my family finally looked at me with the pride they showered so effortlessly on Mark and Chloe. But as the command rang out and the graduates pivoted, I dared a glance toward the bleachers. My eyes locked on the two empty folding chairs with Sykes written neatly on the program slips. Everyone else's rows were crowded, mothers waving, fathers shouting names, siblings snapping photos, but mine was bare. The ache that welled in my chest was sharper than the blades we carried. I forced my gaze forward again, refusing to let my composure crack under the weight of disappointment. Still, I couldn't stop the intrusive thought. They had promised. My mother had declared, weeks before, that nothing would keep them from witnessing this quaint little event. My father had nodded, offering the barest smile. I had believed them because I wanted to. The ceremony rolled forward with military precision marches, salutes, speeches. Each cheer from the crowd landed like a stone against my ribs, a reminder of what I lacked. The roar of applause for my peers should have been a chorus that carried us all, but for me, it only made the silence in my corner of the stands more deafening. Halfway through, movement caught my eye. Two figures shuffled into the row, apologizing as they stepped past knees and purses. Linda, immaculate in a silk blouse unsuited for the heat, fanned herself with the program as though the day were an inconvenience. David followed, his head bent, avoiding eye contact with those they disrupted. They sat, finally filling the chairs that had mocked me with their absence. When our eyes met, Linda's expression wasn't pride. It was irritation, as though my success had demanded too much of her schedule. "Sorry, darling," she whispered loudly enough for the woman beside her to hear. "Chloe's post didn't get enough likes this morning. Total crisis. We had to help her draft something new." She rolled her eyes as if her explanation was both reasonable and noble. The words struck harder than any drill instructor's bark ever had. My graduation years of sweat, fear, and resolve had been less urgent than Chloe's fragile empire of followers. I clenched my fists behind my back, nails biting into palms, and willed myself to keep standing tall. As the ceremony neared its end, applause swelled again. Names were called, and I stepped forward when mine rang out across the parade ground. Ensign Sarah Sykes. The title filled me with a pride that burned despite everything. My heart surged with the knowledge that I had earned this. Yet, as I approached my parents in the crowd afterward, the moment soured. My mother's eyes swept me up and down, pausing not on the insignia I had fought for, but on the lines of the uniform itself. "Such a shame," Linda said with a sigh, "that they hide your figure like that. You'd look so much better in something fitted. At least Chloe's clothes flatter her brand." David shifted uneasily beside her, offering a weak smile that held no defense, no acknowledgement of what I had achieved. "Your mother's just saying you look professional," he muttered, eyes darting away. I smiled anyway, because that was my role, the ghost in their pageant, the quiet background piece to their noisy world. My peers were embraced, photographed, celebrated. I was corrected. That evening, as the sun set and the festivities scattered into private dinners and embraces, I sat alone in my dorm room, staring at the reflection of my uniform in the mirror. The pride I had felt in the morning still lived there, but it had been dulled, overshadowed by their absence, their lateness, their trivial criticisms. And in that silence a truth settled in my bones like lead. I could not expect applause from them, not even on the day I had surpassed every obstacle. I was their shadow, not their star. And maybe I always would be. That day, I stopped expecting applause. They called me a paper pusher because I let them. The phrase had taken root like a weed, sprouting up at every family dinner, every whispered aside, every smirk that passed between Mark and Chloe when conversation turned my way. I let it live. I let it grow. Because what else could I do? To them, I was scenery again. The quiet daughter tucked in the corner, a stack of invisible files in human form. To correct them would have meant revealing too much, and in my line of work, revelation wasn't just discouraged, it was forbidden. It was safer that way. I reminded myself of that each time the insults surfaced. Safety wasn't just about me, it was about the operations, the people, the missions I carried on my conscience, but never on my lips. Washington, D.C. had trained me well in discretion. Behind the polished walls of the Pentagon, where echoes of secrets filled sterile corridors, silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. My apartment during those years was deliberately unremarkable. White walls, tidy counters, minimal furniture, a place that neither revealed nor invited. Commander Evans had visited a handful of times, always careful, always respectful. He'd sit stiff-backed on my couch, papers spread across his lap, his face drawn with the strain of holding in everything we knew but couldn't share. "You let them think you're nothing," he had said once, more observation than accusation. "And maybe that's what keeps you safe." I shrugged, pouring him coffee, the bitter scent filling the space. "If they want to believe I shuffle papers, let them. Better than the truth." His eyes studied me then, heavy with something between admiration and pity, but he didn't push further. In our world, restraint was loyalty. My family never asked questions that mattered. Their curiosity was shallow, a way to fill silence until someone could pivot back to Mark's half-baked startups or Chloe's latest collaboration with a makeup brand. When they did ask, it was with the same glazed disinterest they reserved for weather reports. "So, still filing things?" Chloe had asked once, her phone angled to catch her own reflection in the screen, rather than my answer. "I'm just an analyst," I had replied smoothly, the words practiced, sanded down to dullness. Linda, sipping wine, chuckled. "At least it's steady work. Not everyone's cut out to chase the big dreams like your brother and sister." Mark laughed loudly, already launching into a pitch for his newest blockchain-adjacent project, while Chloe pursed her lips at the screen, her thumb flicking over filters as if my answer was background noise. My father, as always, retreated behind the newspaper or his phone as though his passivity excused him from the cruelty. And so, the role calcified. Sarah the paper pusher. Sarah the filing cabinet. Sarah the safe, boring shadow to their dazzling failures. It wasn't until Chloe's vlog that the insult became something more than a family jab. I stumbled upon it late one night, a clip forwarded by a colleague with the subject line, "This your sister?" On screen, Chloe was laughing, her followers flooding the comments with emojis and snide remarks. "Guys," she said, her tone syrupy and cruel, "meet my sister, the human filing cabinet. She files and files and files all day long. Riveting stuff, right?" The video had gone viral in her corner of the internet, picked up by gossip accounts and meme pages. Strangers across the country, even across oceans, laughed at a caricature of me that wasn't real, but had become truer in their eyes than anything I could ever say. For a moment, I felt the old sting, that sharp ache of invisibility turned spectacle. But it didn't last. Instead, something colder settled over me, a steel lining beneath the bruises. I closed the laptop, my reflection ghosted faintly on the dark screen, and a smirk curled across my lips. They wouldn't laugh for long. For years, I begged for their love. That night, I decided to fight for my freedom. The words echoed in my head long after I whispered them into the quiet of my apartment. Outside, Washington's humid July air pressed against the windows, the city buzzing faintly with its nocturnal rhythm. My desk lamp cast a small circle of light across papers I wasn't really reading, my mind spinning instead through the countless nights I had spent hoping, pleading, bargaining for some scrap of recognition from the people who were supposed to see me. It had been years of excuses, of self-blame, of thinking if I just tried harder, achieved more, they might finally turn their gaze in my direction. But all I had earned was silence, or worse, ridicule. The Lakehouse always came up this time of year, looming over me like an annual exam I hadn't studied for. My inbox and family group chat filled with reminders. Don't forget Dad's birthday. Big celebration planned. Mark's new project reveal. Chloe's livestream event special guest surprise. I had avoided it for years. Deployment schedule's crazy. Too much classified work, can't step away. I'll make the next one. Lies. All of them. And they had suited everyone. They got to bask in their golden bubble, and I got to avoid being the punchline. But this year, my fingers hovered over the screen of my phone, the glow painting my face as I scrolled through their chatter. Linda had sent a photo of floral arrangements she'd ordered for the dining hall. Chloe dropped a TikTok teaser about our iconic Sykes family event. Mark posted a link to some ridiculous startup deck, promising to unveil his visionary journey on Dad's big night. And in between, David had typed his usual half-hearted thumbs-up emoji, his digital equivalent of parenting. I had dodged them long enough. With a breath I didn't know I was holding, I typed 2 simple words into the group chat. I'll be there. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly, bubbles bouncing with eagerness I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Linda replied first, predictably effusive. "Oh, sweetheart, this makes me so happy. Your father will be thrilled." Chloe sent a string of shocked emojis and a sarcastic, "Finally crawling out of the archives, sis?" Mark, never one to miss a jab, added, "Guess even filing cabinets can travel." I didn't answer any of them. Let them interpret my message however they wanted. To them, it looked like surrender, like I was giving in to the ritual, slipping back into my place as background noise. They couldn't see the steel beneath my silence, the shift already underway. The lamp on my desk flickered once, a reminder of the city's overworked grid. I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out the sat phone, its weight familiar, grounding. It wasn't for family calls, not for gossip or celebrations. It was a line reserved for a world they couldn't imagine, a world they mocked, without realizing how little they understood. My thumb hovered over the keypad, hesitation prickling my skin. Once I entered the code, there would be no undoing it. I thought of the academy parade ground, the empty chairs that had branded my heart. I thought of Chloe's viral sneers, Mark's smug self-promotion, Linda's weaponized pride, and my father's cowardly silence. All of it had led here. I pressed the keys slowly, each number a drumbeat. Sykes, Alpha 1. The recall protocol confirmed with a quiet beep, the sterile, digital tone carrying more weight than any applause I'd ever craved. Evans would see the flag. He'd know I wasn't hiding anymore. That line in my life, drawn so carefully between who I was at work and who I was at home, was no longer a barrier, it was a fuse. The room was still. My phone buzzed again with another flood of family messages, but I didn't look. Instead, I rose, walking to the mirror mounted above my dresser. My reflection stared back, the same tired eyes, the same controlled expression, but something had shifted. This wasn't surrender. This was the decision. I leaned closer, almost daring myself to say it aloud, the words misting against the glass. Let the truth happen. They always said money was tight unless it was for someone else's dream. That sentence haunted me more than any of the slights, more than the mocking nicknames or the silences that followed my victories. Because money was supposed to be neutral, wasn't it? Cold, logical, finite. Yet in the Sykes family, money bent toward the loudest, shiniest voice. It flowed easily, generously, when the request came from anyone but me. I can still see that dinner in 2021. A chandelier spilled golden light across the polished mahogany table. Crystal glasses chimed faintly with every careless toast. The restaurant was the kind of place where menus didn't show prices because patrons weren't supposed to care. My parents cared deeply, of course, but only when I asked for something. Tonight, they were all ears for Mark. He leaned forward, sleeves rolled, his voice brimming with rehearsed energy. "Picture this," he said, stabbing the air with his fork for emphasis. "A cafe built around blockchain, coffee and crypto under one roof. You don't just buy lattes, you buy experiences, tokens that unlock memberships, networking, digital futures." Linda clasped her hands as if he were unveiling a cure for cancer. "Oh, Mark, that sounds groundbreaking." David nodded sagely, though his eyes revealed he barely understood. "How much will you need to get this rolling?" 75 grand for the pilot location," Mark replied smoothly, as if he had rehearsed the number in front of the mirror. Pocket change, considering the ROI. Before dessert even arrived, my father was drafting a transfer. The waiter set down plates of creme brulee as if punctuation to the moment, the flame still flickering atop the sugar shell. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. I remembered sitting at a similar table years earlier, asking for help with flight school, the one dream that had kept me awake at night as a teenager. The answer had been firm, cold. "Too expensive, Sarah. We can't throw away money on impractical whims." Whims. That word had gutted me more than the rejection itself. I had swallowed it, folded the pain neatly away, and enlisted in another path where the uniform became my wings. Now here they were, pouring funds into a blockchain cafe. As if on cue, Chloe chimed in, her phone angled high, ring light perched at the edge of the table. "Guys, wait till you hear this." She swiveled the camera toward herself, then toward Mark, narrating in her syrupy influencer cadence. "My genius brother is reinventing coffee culture. And look, there's my sister, just sitting quietly, boring job energy." The camera caught me mid-breath, my face washed in the golden glow of the chandelier. I forced the corners of my mouth upward, a frozen smile that cracked inside. her followers would lap it up. They always did. Within hours, the clip would spread across her social platforms, my image reduced to background wallpaper in someone else's performance. And I need to talk about my content house idea, Chloe continued, never lowering the phone. A mansion where creators can collab 24/7 trend after trend. We just need Mom to co-sign the lease. Right, Mom? Linda didn't hesitate. Of course, darling. It's an investment in your future. The pen scratched across the lease document a week later, but in my memory it happened right there at the table, the signature echoing like a coffin nail. My coffin. Every flourish of ink was another reminder. Their support had always been conditional, their love transactional, and I was never worth the asking price. The laughter, the toasts, the bright chatter swirled around me as I sat perfectly still, the heat rising under my collar. No one noticed my silence, or maybe they had trained themselves not to. To them, I was a fixed object in the background, an easy foil for their brilliance. But inside, something shifted. I wasn't counting failures anymore. I was keeping score. A ledger that wasn't written in numbers but in wounds, in each slight, each denial, each humiliating broadcast that painted me as invisible. As Chloe raised her glass for another toast, her camera capturing the moment for her followers, I whispered the words only I could hear, the balance sheet scrawling itself across my mind. One day, the ledger will balance. At work, it meant silent authority. At home, it meant invisibility. The words echoed in my mind as the Pentagon's command room hummed with the low, electric tension of controlled urgency. The walls glowed with the faint green light of situation screens, maps alive with moving data points, vessels at sea, drones circling territories, encrypted feeds pulsing like veins. Here, I wasn't scenery. Here, I was the current itself, and every officer in the room turned when I spoke. Operation Sovereign Shield, I began, voice even, crisp, resonant in the sterile chamber. The perimeter will extend an additional 70 nautical miles by 0400 hours. Electronic surveillance must remain dark until the second phase. No deviations, no improvisations. This is containment, not confrontation. A dozen heads nodded, pens scratched, keyboards clicked. I stood at the center console, the world's noise distilled into charts, and commands only a handful could interpret. Silent authority, it was a mantle I had learned to wear without excess, without flourish, but with unshakable weight. Beside me, Commander Evans monitored the feeds, his jaw tight with concentration. He had been at my side long enough to read the spaces between my words, the restraint I carried like armor. When the last officer filed out with their notes, leaving the room in dimmed stillness, he turned to me. Admiral, he said, the title low but deliberate, not for show, not for protocol, for recognition. You can hold fleets in your hand, bend strategy to your will, and yet at home, you shrink. Why? I didn't flinch, but I felt the question land heavier than any briefing. My eyes lingered on the glowing edges of the screen, the shifting arcs of radar lines. Because it's easier, I said finally. Easier to let them believe the lie than to explain the truth. They wouldn't understand this world, and I have no need to prove it to them. Evans crossed his arms, his gaze steady. One day, you'll have to stop hiding. You know that. A bitter smile tugged at my mouth. One day, I echoed. The words were not a denial, but they weren't an agreement either. The silence between us stretched, filled only by the steady hum of the equipment. He didn't push further. He never did. His loyalty was measured not in demands but in presence, in his quiet reinforcement of who I truly was. Even off duty, even in shadows, he called me by the rank I had earned in sweat and steel, not the dismissive labels my family had carved into me. On the desk, the readiness papers lay waiting. Operation Sovereign Shield would move forward only with my authorization. I reached for the pen, my hand steady, though inside I felt the gravity of both worlds pressing closer together. I signed, Sykes, Alpha 1. The name glowed faintly on the sheet, a seal of identity that no one at the Lakehouse could ever dismiss as paper-pushing. They didn't know yet, but they would. And as the ink dried, I felt it the inevitable collision drawing nearer, the line between silent authority and silenced daughter about to be erased forever. The last straw wasn't cruel. It was casual, which somehow cut deeper. The brunch table at my mother's house glittered with sunlight and excess. White linen draped to the floor, silver cutlery polished to a mirror sheen, crystal glasses catching the lazy Sunday light. The smell of buttered croissants and smoked salmon hung thick in the air. the kind of tableau that screamed perfection to outsiders but cut me open in silence. Linda, ever the hostess, held court at the head of the table, her pearls gleaming as she waved her fork like a conductor. Mark just had an incredible investor meeting, she gushed, her tone filled with maternal pride that had never once been directed at me. You should have seen the way they listened. My son is going to change the game. Mark leaned back in his chair, the corner of his mouth twitching into a smug half-smile. Well, you know, visionary thinking just has that effect. He sipped his mimosa slowly, savoring the applause in his head more than the drink. Chloe, perched like a peacock with her phone angled toward herself, chimed in. And I've just locked down a new brand deal lifestyle wear collab. Limited drop. Mom, we'll need the foyer cleared for the shoot. Linda beamed, as though her daughter's shallow achievement was a coronation. Of course, darling. The house is yours. Then, as if by script, the spotlight turned. My mother tilted her head, her smile still sharp, and asked, And you, Sarah? Still stuck at that little desk job? The table chuckled softly, as though it were a family tradition to laugh at my expense. I swallowed the words that rose in my throat, the truth I could never speak. I wanted to tell them that my desk overlooked global strategy, that the screens I watched lit up with movements of fleets and the fate of nations, but their image of me, as the family's quiet disappointment, was easier for them to hold on to. I stayed still. Chloe's phone swung my way. Look, guys, she narrated for her thousands of followers. Sis is still the human filing cabinet. Same old, same old. Her laughter spilled like acid, casual and cruel by virtue of effortlessness. The camera captured me mid-blink, mid-breath, mid-bleed. I forced a smile so rigid it hurt my cheeks. But the damage was already done. My phone buzzed beneath the table minutes later. A message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Didn't know you were still pushing papers. Wow. The words on the screen were a mirror, reflecting the viral reach of Chloe's mockery. This wasn't contained to the gilded cage of family anymore. It had spilled into the world outside, a stain spreading wider with every laugh, every careless share. I bit my lip hard, the copper tang of blood blooming against my tongue. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The chatter around me blurred, a wash of voices and clinking silverware while something inside me crystallized, sharp as ice. I thought of all the years I had endured in silence, all the moments I had been reduced to scenery in their performance. That ledger I had been keeping, invisible and precise, tallied another entry. The balance drew closer with every humiliation, every dismissal. Enough. Justice wasn't something I asked for anymore. It was something I would let happen. The war room at the Pentagon carried a gravity that pressed into every breath. Giant radar maps stretched across the wall arcs of blue and green sweeping across the South China Sea, threads of digital light-marking ships and submarines like silent chess pieces. The hum of electronics was steady, but beneath it, tension pooled thick. A storm was building halfway across the world, but my own storm was already here, in my hands. I stood at the center, posture rigid, voice level. Carrier groups hold position at the 70-mile perimeter. Escort vessels remain dark until instructed. Will respond only to breach, not provocation. Staff officers scribbled, their pens dragging across notepads as if they could keep pace with the shifts of global currents. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and steel, a mix I had long associated with vigilance, with nights spent waiting for the phone that could pull me from sleep and drop me into history. Commander Evans stood slightly behind me, silent until the briefing thinned, the last officer saluting before slipping out. The heavy door hissed shut, leaving us in the glow of screens. His eyes fixed on me, reading my resolve with a familiarity sharpened over years. You're changing the recall contact, he said. Not as a question, but as an accusation wrapped in concern. Yes, I answered simply. The tablet glowed before me, the line of authorization open and waiting. Evans's name was currently listed as the Alpha 1 recall contact, the shield that had always taken the brunt of the alerts, so I could remain faceless to the world outside. Now, I was erasing it. He moved closer, his voice lower. Admiral, think carefully. If you do this, there's no going back. They'll never see you the same way again. I thought of the brunch, of Chloe's camera tilted toward me, of a cousin's text that bled humiliation across my phone screen. I thought of my father's silence, my mother's laughter, the ledger I had tallied with each denial. I thought of years of shadows, of silence mistaken for weakness. Good, I said at last, my tone like steel cut clean. They've never seen me at all. It's time. Evans shook his head, not in disagreement, but in weary understanding. He had warned me before, in softer moments, when the burden pressed heavier. But his loyalty didn't waver now. He just stood there, bearing witness. I typed deliberately, each keystroke a cut through years of invisibility. Recall contact. Sykes, Alpha 1. The letters pulsed on the screen, brighter than they had any right to be. Evans exhaled, the sound almost a prayer. Then so be it. I reached for the seal, stamped my name in red across the order, and with that, the lines were drawn. The worlds I had kept apart with silence, secrecy, and obedience would collide. Not by accident, not by slip, by design. On the console beside me, my encrypted sat phone buzzed faintly as if stirred awake, the device that tethered my two lives. I lifted it, the weight of it heavier now. Not just steel and circuits, but inevitability itself. The screens hummed, the lights blinked. Across the ocean, fleets maneuvered. At home, laughter still rang unchecked. And in my hand, the trigger waited. The Lakehouse was their theater. This time, I will bring my own script. The group chat lit up with bubbles of shallow delight, the kind of manufactured warmth that only came when my family thought they had won. Linda's message arrived first, strings of emojis littered between words. So happy you're finally joining us, sweetheart. This means the world to your father and me. The tone was syrupy, self-congratulatory, as though my acceptance was proof she had been right all along that her little paper pusher had finally surrendered to family tradition. Mark chimed in almost instantly. Knew you'd come around. Can't wait to talk through my new venture with you. Maybe you can finally invest? The audacity stung, though it no longer surprised me. He had been funded his whole life on the fumes of other people's patience and money, and he expected me to join the long line of enablers. Then came Chloe, predictably gleeful, her words punctuated by the sound of a live broadcast notification pinging in the background of my phone. Even my boring sis is joining us, guys. She had actually typed it in the group chat. As if mocking me publicly wasn't enough, she wanted it carved in digital stone. I imagined her followers laughing, spamming her feed with heart emojis and jokes at my expense. I typed slowly, each word measured, the opposite of their noise, looking forward to it. I hit send and set the phone down on the table. The reply came back in seconds, a stream of clapping hands, champagne bottles, fireworks gifts. They read my calm response as surrender, and that suited me perfectly. The apartment was quiet but for the low hum of the air conditioner. I pulled my suitcase from the closet and laid it open on the bed. A swimsuit plain, practical, without sequins or brands, folded neatly into one corner. A book I had been meaning to finish, its spine creased from years of carrying it into lonely airports and quiet rooms, slid into the side pocket. My hand hovered over the shelf before finally taking down the sat phone, its matte black surface absorbing the lamplight. I held it a moment longer than necessary, feeling the gravity in its weight, the way it represented the world that had shaped me, the world my family had never bothered to see. The device clicked softly as I slid it into the suitcase. It was not clothing or entertainment. It was a concealed weapon, quiet but absolute. If the family thought the Lakehouse would remain their stage, they were about to find out what happens when the scenery walks off the wall and writes her own script. The phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't the family, it was Evans. His voice, steady but urgent, filled my ear. Admiral, are you certain? Once you step into their world with that sat phone in your bag, there won't be any turning back. They'll know. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, and nothing will be the same. I let his words hang between us, a warning I didn't need, but respected. That's the point, Evans, I said softly. I've hidden long enough. A pause. Then his voice, lower, quieter. Then may the truth do what it must. I ended the call and zipped the suitcase shut. The apartment seemed to lean into silence, as though even the walls held their breath. Outside, the city glowed with its usual defiance lights burning against the night, cars tracing lines of red across the avenues. I stood at the window, suitcase at my side, the sat phone nestled among ordinary clothes and everyday things. See you at the lake. The Lakehouse was their kingdom. I arrived not as a subject, but as a storm waiting offshore. The July sun bounced off the rippling water, throwing golden light against the wide deck where my family had already gathered with steaming mugs and curated smiles. Chloe angled her phone just so, making sure the morning glow hit her cheekbones before she panned across the table. Family bliss at the Sykes Lakehouse. she chirped to her followers, her tone bubbling with the kind of synthetic joy that smelled like plastic. Mark leaned back in his chair, sunglasses perched on his head, talking louder than necessary. Content's great, sis, but the real star here is innovation. He raised his mug like a toast. Just wait until you hear my pitch this weekend. His voice carried that grating mix of arrogance and desperation, half promise, half plea. Linda sat between them, luminous with pride, her smile polished and permanent, like porcelain that never cracked. She fussed with the tablecloth, then with her pearls, finally settling into her role as MC of their little kingdom. Isn't this lovely? All of us together again. The world should see how strong a family can be when they believe in each other. Her glance toward me was fleeting, clipped, as if she were checking whether the table setting was balanced. David, meanwhile, reclined with an air of contentment, his silence one of practiced detachment, a man who had mastered the art of floating above currents too messy to navigate. He lifted his coffee with both hands, sighing at the view, oblivious to the play his wife and children staged at arm's length. "Don't let a paper jam sink the country," Mark added suddenly, turning toward me with that same smirk he'd worn since adolescence. A few chuckles tumbled from the table. Chloe snorted, phone catching the moment before she cut the feed. Linda didn't even hide her indulgence, her lips curved in approval, as though his jab had landed with wit rather than cruelty. I lifted my cup slowly, the porcelain warm against my fingers. I smiled too, though mine was not their brittle, performative grin. It was quiet, contained like the calm just before air thickens, when the sky holds its breath. The coffee was bitter on my tongue, but not nearly as bitter as the years they had spent laughing at a daughter they thought they understood. They saw me still as the ghost at their table, the one who filled a chair but not the narrative. To them, I was scenery silent, safe, forgettable, and they reveled in that illusion. But the morning air carried more than the scent of coffee and lake water. Beneath the drone of small talk, a sound began to bleed into the distance. Soft at first, like the heartbeat of something enormous pressing against the horizon. Whump, whump, whump. No one else noticed. Not yet. At first, they thought it was a nuisance. By the time it landed, it was too late. The sound grew from a distant murmur into a thunderous drumbeat that rattled the windows of the Lakehouse. Mark looked up first, squinting into the glare of the sky. "What the hell is that? Somebody lose a lawnmower up there?" he shouted, trying for humor, though his voice had a nervous edge. Chloe whipped her phone toward the horizon, ever the opportunist, already babbling to her livestream. "Guys, you're not going to believe this free helicopter show." The vibration grew heavier, a deep mechanical growl shaking the deck chairs. Linda's hand flew to her pearls as napkins lifted from the table and sailed into the air like startled birds. "David!" she shrieked. "Do something about this!" As if her husband could command the sky. The HH-60 Pave Hawk swept into view, a gray beast slicing across the clear blue morning. Its rotors churned the lake into white froth, blasting spray against the dock. The once perfect brunch tableau disintegrated. Plates skittered off the table, Chloe's tripod collapsed, and her carefully staged family bliss toppled into chaos. The machine roared lower, flattening Linda's prized flower beds and whipping the manicured hedges into submission. "My roses!" she screamed, staggering backward, shielding her face from flying petals. Mark swore under his breath, clutching at his hair as the gale tossed it wild. David half rose, half froze, the newspaper he'd been holding ripped from his hands and shredded into confetti by the downdraft. Through it all, I sat steady. The novel I held fluttered at the corners but remained open in my lap, its words undisturbed by the storm. The world around me scrambled, but I let the chaos wash over in silence. Chloe shrieked, "My camera! Oh my God, it's ruined! Are you seeing this, guys?" Her phone slipped from her hands, spinning across the deck before shattering against the railing. Her cry turned into a ragged sob as her precious followers were cut off mid-spectacle. That was when the sharp electronic tone cut through the storm, a shrill, insistent beep from my encrypted sat phone lying beside my cup. The screen pulsed with a code no one else at the table could decipher. To me, it was as clear as daylight. Alpha 1 recall. The family's panic ricocheted around me. Linda clutched her chest. Mark demanded answers no one could give. Chloe wailed over her shattered gear. David stood paralyzed in the doorway, his kingdom cracking under the hurricane he couldn't name. I lifted the sat phone with deliberate calm, pressing the receiver to my ear. My voice cut through the rotor thunder, clear and steady. "Sykes, copy all, en route." The effect was instantaneous. From the open hatch of the Pavehawk, two figures dropped into the Storm Special Operations airmen in dark flight suits, visors gleaming, harness straps snapping taut as they hit the ground with precision. They moved as if choreographed, the chaos of the world reduced to mere background noise against their discipline. Linda stumbled backward, nearly toppling over a chair. What is happening? Who are these men? Mark's bluster deflated into raw fear. Chloe shielded her face from the debris, too stunned to scream. The lead airman strode forward with quick, efficient steps. His boots struck the deck with a rhythm that silenced even the rotor wash. He stopped in front of me, spine straight as a steel rod. Without hesitation, he snapped his arm up in a flawless salute, the gesture sharp enough to slice the air. The deck fell silent, save for the relentless pounding of the rotors above. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, not the paper pusher, not the filing cabinet, but the one figure untouched by the chaos. The storm had landed. The salute cut sharper than any blade, it severed their fiction from my reality. The sound of the rotors was still a thunderous heartbeat, pounding through the deck, rattling glasses, and sending napkins tumbling like frightened birds. But the noise couldn't drown the silence that had seized my family. For once, their mouths failed them. The airman's visor reflected the sunlight, but his voice was clear, precise, trained to carry over storms. Admiral Sykes, the transport is hot. Command control is standing by for your orders. The words dropped like lead across the deck. Chloe's phone slipped from her trembling fingers, tumbling against the boards until it went dark, her live stream cutting off mid-frame. For the first time in her career, there was no curated edit, no filter to protect her image. The truth had crashed through her lens before she could spin it into something digestible. Mark's jaw hung open, a grotesque echo of the smirk he had worn so easily hours before. He looked like a man gutted by a punch he never saw coming, the arrogance draining out of him in real time. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came, only a faint wheeze swallowed by the roar above. Linda's face, always so carefully arranged in masks of pride, superiority, and control, shattered before my eyes. The woman who had dismissed me with mocking labels now stared at me like a stranger had taken my place. Her pearls rattled against her throat with each ragged breath, her kingdom collapsing in silence. David clutched the doorframe, knuckles white, his expression hollow. For once, his passivity betrayed him. He wasn't a man detached anymore. He was simply irrelevant. I rose from my chair, the book I'd been pretending to read sliding quietly onto the table. My hair whipped across my face, the wind tugging at my clothes, but my steps were measured, deliberate. The storm belonged to me now. Their eyes clung to me with desperation, confusion, and disbelief as I straightened my shoulders. My voice cut through the chaos, calm, steady, undeniable. I have to go to work. Seems my paper pushing has a deadline. Mark flinched as if the words were a slap. Chloe's lips trembled, searching for a snide remark but finding nothing. Linda swayed on her heels, clutching at her pearls as though they could anchor her in a reality she no longer controlled. I turned without another glance, descending the wooden steps of the deck, each stride slicing deeper into their fragile fiction. The airmen flanked me, shadows of discipline and duty, their presence a wall of silence against the family's unraveling. The rotor wash tore at everything, chairs toppling, flowers uprooted, hair and clothing whipped into chaos. Linda lunged forward, her voice ragged, shrill with desperation. "Sarah, wait!" But the storm devoured her plea. The helicopter's roar swallowed her words whole, scattering them into the wind like ash. And I kept walking. Liberation didn't roar. It whispered with every blocked number. The mission had drained me in ways my family could never comprehend. Hours inside the war room, decisions drawn like blades across shifting maps, the weight of every order etched into my bones. When the final report closed and my signature sealed it, I stepped out into the evening air at Andrews, the hangars stretching like silent sentinels against a fading orange sky. Exhaustion clung to me, but beneath it was something cleaner clarity. My phone vibrated nonstop. It hadn't stopped since the rotors lifted me away from the Lakehouse, their faces swallowed by wind and disbelief. I unlocked it, the screen flooded with a litany of texts, missed calls, voicemails stacked in desperate sequence. Linda's messages arrived first, sharp and commanding even in pixel form. "Explain yourself. This stunt ruined your father's birthday. You humiliated us." Then another, softer but still edged with pride wounded. "I didn't raise you to betray your family like this." David's came next, more hesitant, his tone caught between apology and retreat. Maybe we overreacted. Let's just talk. It doesn't need to be like this. Mark's tirades bled arrogance even in collapse. You could have told me. We could have used this together, media, investors. The whole world would have backed me with your name attached. As if my life was another startup for him to squander, Chloe's barrage glittered with panic. Do you have any idea how many followers I lost because of you? You ruined my feed. People are asking questions I can't answer. Fix this. Then, please. I didn't mean the jokes. You know it was just content. Each word stung, not because it hurt, but because it confirmed everything I had always known. Their concern was never me, only the reflection of me in their stories. I scrolled slowly, reading them like epitaphs of a life I had already buried. My thumbs hovered for a long moment. Then I began to type. My words were not venom, not vengeance. They were truth. My life was never a secret. It was just private. The story you wrote is over. I sent it once to the family group chat and watched the tiny checkmark bloom beside it. For the first time, I didn't wait for the replies. Instead, I tapped Linda's name, pressed block contact. Her voice, her claws, silenced in an instant. Then David. His passivity would never bind me again. Block. Mark followed, his greed cut off like a cord frayed too thin. Block. Finally, Chloe, the mirror of mockery I had lived beneath. Block. One by one, their names faded into the void, replaced by the stillness of an empty screen. My hand trembled only once, not from doubt, but from the weight of release. Each tap was a whisper of freedom, softer than the roar of any engine, but infinitely more powerful. I sat on the bench outside the hangar, the night settling around me, the silence thick and absolute. The phone was dark in my palm now, no longer a tether, no longer a weapon against me. I raised my eyes to the runway lights flickering in the distance, steady, unwavering. The storm was behind me. The silence stretched, not as emptiness, but as ownership. This silence is mine. They tried to bury me in silence. I built a life inside it. The chapel at Annapolis smelled faintly of polished wood and candle wax, its vaulted ceiling holding a solemn reverence that no words could touch. I stood in uniform once again, rows of young officers gleaming in their pressed whites before me. Their families filled the pews, faces beaming, cameras raised to capture futures just beginning. I no longer searched for familiar faces in the crowd. That ache had burned away months ago, leaving something steadier in its place. Eden Miller stood rigid at attention, her hands clenched to keep from trembling. I remembered that nervous pride, the moment where ambition and fear collided in the same chest. I stepped forward, pin glinting between my fingers, and attached the insignia to her collar. The applause that followed wasn't mine, nor did I want it. The glow in her eyes was enough. Legacy didn't live in bloodlines. It lived in moments like this, in the people who carried pieces of you forward because you believed in them. Wear it with truth, I murmured quietly, so only she could hear. Her nod was sharp, her throat tight with the effort of holding tears back. For a brief second, I saw myself reflected not as the ghost at the edge of a family table, but as someone who had carved meaning from silence. The circle that began with humiliation had ended with purpose. When the ceremony closed, I lingered by the chapel doors as the cadets filed out into the bright Maryland afternoon. Laughter, photographs, embraces, they swirled around me like a tide I no longer needed to enter. My sanctuary waited elsewhere. I saluted Eden one last time, her grin breaking wide as she joined her waiting parents. Then I turned and walked away, unburdened. The evening light painted Washington, D.C., in strokes of gold and shadow as I returned to my apartment. The skyline stretched endless through the glass panes, monuments standing like steady anchors against the dusk. Inside, everything was ordered, deliberate. Books lined in neat rows, charts still pinned to my wall, the steady hum of quiet machines on standby. The chaos of other people's narratives had no place here. I set my cap on the table, poured myself a glass of water, and let the silence settle around me. It wasn't the silence of dismissal, the void left when voices drowned me out. This was silence chosen, crafted. A home I had built brick by brick when noise offered nothing but derision. My phone lay face down on the counter, no longer an open wound. No messages would come through. That chapter had ended the night I pressed block. For a moment I let myself remember the decades of laughter that cut, the empty chairs, the applause withheld. Then I let it dissolve. Justice hadn't thundered into being, it had arrived in the steady steps I'd taken toward myself, until I was no longer waiting for anyone else to grant me worth. I leaned against the window, glass cool beneath my palm, the city lights blooming one by one in the gathering dark. My voice was only a whisper, but it filled the room with the weight of truth. Justice may be late, but it always arrives. The solitude no longer felt like exile. It was a country I claimed, a refuge rich with possibility. For the first time, the silence was full. The storm that began with silence ended in revelation, tearing down a family's fiction and leaving truth standing tall. What was once humiliation became strength, and what was once dismissal became proof that no lie can smother justice forever. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict echoes beyond the moment, it reshapes a lifetime. Sometimes it only takes one act of defiance to break generations of chains. Like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you felt the same wound in victory, or 2 if you think the story could have gone another way.